Hello, and welcome to a virtual brown bag lunch program. My name is Tova Brandt. I am the Executive Director of the Museum of Danish America, and we are thrilled to be able to welcome you to a program focused on our newest exhibition, which is called Art Nouveau Innovation, Danish Porcelain from an American Collector. I want to thank all of our members for making possible everything that we do here at the museum, from our exhibitions to programs to just keeping the lights turned on. I want to especially thank the COVID Family Foundation, who are our 2020 sponsors of our Brown Bag Lunch series. Because we're excited to introduce this new exhibition, it is especially wonderful that today's speaker is that very American collector. Dr. Todd Reiser is the owner of these pieces and the lender to this exhibition, and we look forward to hearing his thoughts and comments on the importance of the Art Nouveau period in Danish porcelain, and maybe some of his favorite pieces and the stories behind them.
This collection started with my father back in about 1947. He bought a wedding present as a gift for someone. It was a small figurine, and he liked what he saw, and after that he started seeking more pieces, and eventually contacted some dealers in New York who befriended him and let him know when certain pieces that they had might be of interest to him. And we're looking at two of these pieces here now, the jar and the vase with the orchids. So those are very early purchases. I came along in 1957, so I was actually born into this. So I was used to a house filled with Danish porcelain. It seemed like home to me. And growing up, I became more and more interested in the porcelain that my father was acquiring. And he also started selling the Christmas plates from home. And I remember helping him with some of the sales in the past. He would put an ad in the local newspaper around Christmas time. He had customers lined up. So through that, he was able to get the funds to purchase the pieces that he really liked. And as far as myself, my first piece that I guess I would say I officially purchased as a collector was in 1982 during my first trip to Denmark. A couple of pieces of stoneware and a small Grøndahl vase that was quite delightful with grasshoppers. The grasshopper jar, it's still in the collection. It's not on display here. My father always had a keen interest in Art Nouveau Danish porcelain, and this was the big breakthrough for the factory in 1885 when Arnold Krogh came along as the artistic director. So this was the renaissance, so to speak, for Royal Copenhagen, where the underglaze painting emerged in a new style. Underglaze painting was common prior to this. Meissen painted their blue onion pattern, and it goes all the way back to the early days in China, in fact. But the new colors, the green, the brown, and the pink, these were developed at Royal Copenhagen, and it led to a whole new range of ideas that they could use on porcelain pieces. Here we see a selection of some of the earliest pieces of Art Nouveau porcelain, starting in 1885 when the technique was first developed. The plate with the heron is by Arnold Krogh, and at that time the blue coloring tended to run and blur as a result of firing. So what the factory did was they would add some gilding to sharpen up the image, and we see it on that plate and also on the top of the base behind, which was produced 1 year later in 1886. So these are among the very first pieces of Art Nouveau porcelain produced at Royal Copenhagen. This was a period of experimentation. The jar in back has kind of a Persian motif. So again, they were trying different styles. And at the same time, Japanese art had a major influence on the development of Art Nouveau, and we see that in the plate in front with the cherry blossom border and the peacock in the center, again with the gold gilding. Royal Copenhagen's competitor, Grøndahl, started in 1853, but they actually did not make any art porcelain that was of note until 1888, when they debuted their famous heron service at the 1888 exhibition in Copenhagen. And we see an example of the plate and the delightful heron compote behind. These pieces were designed by Petro Krohn, who was the artistic director at Grøndahl. And he also designed the two small cups based again on floral or plant motifs. Figurine production at Royal Copenhagen was not an entirely new venture. They did produce some figurines in overglazed porcelain back in 1780 when the factory was in its infancy. But here we see some examples of underglaze decorated figurines, and these were started again by Arnold Krogh and his colleague Karl Lisberg in 1886. The codfish in front, again, distinctly Danish. This is a prototype of the codfish that was first introduced in 1888. And again, this is about the earliest figurine that Royal Copenhagen produced, along with an eel and this delightful looking lump sucker. It's an odd name, but it's a fantastic fish. And this particular example was personally painted by Arnold Krogh. As we see here, fish and sea life, again, was very important to the Danes. Here's a small charger by Gerhard Heilmann with jellyfish in the Art Nouveau style, reflecting the influence of Japanese art. The international exhibitions and World's Fairs played a critical role in helping to promote the Art Nouveau porcelain that was developed by Royal Copenhagen. They participated in not only the 1888 exhibition in Copenhagen, where their works debuted for the first time, but the following year they were participants in the 1889 World's Fair in Paris, where they received great accolades and received the Grand Prix for their new style of underglaze painting. In 1893, Royal Copenhagen first showed their wares at the Chicago exhibition. And here we see some of the pieces that were on display. The kangaroo vase by Gerhard Heilmann, the jar in front by Olaf Jensen, the small vase here with a lizard, which again shows the Japanese influence. And then this interesting bowl with marabou storks. And in this case, the porcelain clay was cut away, so the storks are actually raised. So this was a unusual technique that was used. We have a few important pieces here. The jar with the mouse on top that was modeled. This was done by Carl Mortensen, one of the leading artists again at the factory. Some of the earlier pieces included modeled animals. Again, this was during their experimental years. This piece dates from 1889. The piece was originally purchased by Louis Comfort Tiffany for his own use, and strangely as it may seem, I purchased this piece on eBay, of all places. So one can find these pieces coming up most anywhere. I have several pieces from the Chicago exhibition of 1893 that were also found on eBay. Next to me here is a well-known polar bear. It was modeled by Karl F. Lisberg, and this specific piece was purchased by the Prince of Wales. As we know, underglaze painting started at Royal Copenhagen with the new style, and Bing and Grøndahl, their major competitor, they tended to follow in the footsteps of Royal Copenhagen, producing similar pieces using the underglaze technique. Here we see an example with reindeer up front, a jar with the more unusual brown coloring at the bottom. But at the exhibition in Stockholm in 1897 and in Brussels in 1898, Bing and Grøndahl was heavily criticized for, again, following in the footsteps of Royal Copenhagen, and the pieces between the two factories were very difficult to differentiate. So the factory needed to plot a new course of action, and what they did was they hired J.F. Williamson as their artistic director in 1898 with the specific goal of creating a new style for the Paris exhibition in 1900. Here we see a large vase with tulips that was most likely designed by Gerhard Heilmann. It was produced by Elizabeth Drews, one of three important women at the factory at Grøndahl. The jar in the middle is by Fanny Gardy, another very important player in terms of Grøndahl. And the small vase on the end, that is also by Fanny Gardy. And Fanny Gardy and Effie Hagerman Lindencrone began at the factory in 1886, actually, and they were responsible for the painting on the Heron service that you saw earlier. Pieces such as the vase by Elizabeth Drews were exhibited at the Paris World's Fair in 1900, and at this point in time, Grøndahl became the clear leader, and they received the Grand Prix, although Royal Copenhagen still received some honors. But at this point in time, again, Grøndahl was able to outdo their competition in terms of the art critics. The pieces that you see here, again, were extremely costly, difficult to make, very time-consuming, and the vase with the tulips likely took about a month or so to produce. In the late 1880s, when the underglaze technique was being developed, there was also work being done in developing some crystalline glazes, as we see here. This was a difficult technique, but Royal Copenhagen was able to perfect these glazes through the work of Vladimir Engelhardt. And we see some nice examples here covering a whole range of different colors. And in front, the small blue vase has what they call a snakeskin glaze, which is quite delightful. And the one next to it has a gray snakeskin glaze towards the bottom. Some of these pieces were also affixed with silver mountings by Anton Mikkelsen, as you see in the sort of caramel colored piece here. And you'll notice that this piece is also variegated. So there were special models that were developed to take advantage of the way these glazes dripped and formed on the surface of these pieces. At the Paris World's Fair in 1900, again, these glazed pieces also received very high honors and attributed to Royal Copenhagen receiving, again, the Grand Prix for their work. Many of the works that you just saw were very costly. These were the pieces produced by the signature artists, both men and women at Royal Copenhagen, and as I mentioned, Fanny Gardy and Effie Hagerman Lindencrone at Grøndahl. So in order to bring the cost down to the level where average individuals could make a purchase, Royal Copenhagen started what was known as the Current Kunst, or Market Art Division. This division was first started with 16 women artists in 1893. And we see some examples here, some of the earlier examples, again, that demonstrate Art Nouveau porcelain. So the jar here with the ferns, again, there's some of these examples can be found in other museums. The fern jar is also in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. There's an interesting clock in front that was developed by Arnold Krogh that reflects the Japanese movement again. And even made things such as oil lamps. Here we see the oil lamp with a sea motif of the starfish and crab. This was shown at the Stockholm exhibition in 1897 and was part of a larger dinner service. Some of these pieces also received silver mountings. The footed jar on the side with the silver lid, that was designed by Arnold Krogh, one of his earlier works in about 1892. Prior to the current Kunst artists, the signature artists were responsible for painting all of the figurines that you saw earlier, like the lump sucker and the codfish. I want to talk about some of the accessories. In addition to the vases and figurines that were done in underglaze, Royal Copenhagen also branched out and produced a wide range of accessory pieces. Here we see three underglaze decorated buttons. These again were produced at the turn of the century, along with a walking stick handle that was actually mounted as a letter sealer. Next to that, we have another walking stick handle with butterflies in the original box. This piece was purchased at Royal Copenhagen store in Paris. And at the time, they had 3 stores outside of Denmark, one in Paris, which opened first in 1890. This was followed by London and then New York shortly thereafter. Next to me here is a wall pocket featuring a bat, which was another very popular piece that clearly reflects the Art Nouveau era. Here we see several hat pins that are fashioned as insects. Again, these are fashionable during the Art Nouveau period, and two rare accessory cases shaped as eggs. Here we see two underglazed chargers, one by Stephen Ussing with the lizard, and the other, the woman reading a paper. Now, the Art Nouveau period ran from approximately 1885 to roughly 1920 or so in terms of Danish porcelain. By the time the factories were exhibiting later on at the exhibitions after 1910, interest in underglazed painting was starting to wane a bit. The technique was picked up by a lot of other companies across Europe as well, Rörstrand in Sweden, Porsgrund in Norway, and then some of the German factories such as Rosenthal. So the technique was no longer new and novel, and times were changing. We had World War I, which was clearly devastating, and then the art world was ready for something fresh and new. So this was pretty much the end of the Art Nouveau era. Then we moved into interest in stoneware in particular and the Art Deco period. But both Royal Copenhagen and Bing and Grøndahl continue to excel in these areas as well. Something for another story at another time.
I want to thank Dr. Reiser for this wonderful introduction to the exhibition. I hope you get a chance to see it here in Elkhorn at the Museum of Danish America, where it will be on view through the end of December and just into the beginning of January. If you don't have a chance to make it, don't worry. This exhibition will tour to other museums, both in Ames, Iowa, Flint, Michigan, and Dubuque, Iowa. Keep a watch of news from the museum, and we hope you continue to enjoy our virtual brown bag lunch programs. Thank you very much for your time today. We will see you online again.